Okay, so today's topic is all about array. The array that we'll be discussing today is all about a multi-dimensional array. So a multi-dimensional array corresponds to the number of rows and number of columns that we have provided on the declaration that we have done. So basically, in here, we have declared an employee array having a column of 3 and row of 3, rows of 3 and column of 3, 3 by 3. And the ID is represented by the first column, second column would be the name, and the third column would be the rate. Take note, the reading of the column is based on the actual index, which starts from 0. Even in the part of the row and column, it always starts with 0. Now, what we have done here is that we declare what are the variables that we needed on creating the program. So we have the scanner for the input. Hours work would be the hours work of the employee that we are being searched or manipulated, its data which we want to be manipulating, and then employee ID, and then choice, and then regular hours work. Regular hours work is the corresponding hours work that we want, basically the minimum hours work that we will be providing for the user. So the option that we have is the generate payroll, update profile, and change rate. The first one is the generate payroll. So looking at the actual options that we have, options 1, 2, and 3 represents for us to identify which row of the actual data or array we want to manipulate. It can be row 0, row 1, row 2, or row 3. Now, all of them requires us to have its corresponding row ID. So, basically, we need to create a function for that one. So, first thing, we want to create a function for printing the actual content of the array. So, first thing is that we declare a method. Take note, a method can be called several times. How many times you want to call the actual method? No problem. It is an advantage of creating a method and function wherein you can call it several times. Okay, so we just declare it as a static print data. So print data. So in order for us to print static void print data, in order for us to print this one, we'll be having a what we call nested loop. So first is that for int. So let's see, int RID. So the row ID is equal to 0, and then RID is less than employee, the length of our array. Then, after that, we want to iterate from that row to its corresponding column. So, row ID in column ID, CID is less than employee sub RID dot length. RID CID plus plus. So we just want to print it. So system dot out print ln. So here, so we just want to print it. So just put employee ID, employee RID, sub the column call ID. So take note, we are printing the data from the array. So print ln, just do print ln so that it won't go down. It will just go down if you finish printing all of the content of the column of each row. Okay, so there. So we have finished this one. Yeah. So now if you'll be calling this one, so for example, choice. So if we press 1, 2, 3, and then we want to print the data. So first, we create a convention. Let's try it. System, that out. So ID. This is the column header. Let's see if it will work. Name. Okay. So let's see what will happen. Semicolon. There. So if we print this one, press 1. Let's say press 1. So I press 1. What happened is that, oh, we did not call it yet. So call it print data. So print data would be here. So if we do that, one. So there you go. So we have ID, name, and rate. So we forgot to put the /t for this one. So just put /t. Okay, so there you go. So it's already printing. Now, since we are printing the data, we want to get the actual row ID of the record. So first, we need to print what would be asked for the what we call employee ID of that person. So first is we do that system.out that print ln, then put the ID or ask the ID. Input employee number, rather, employee ID. Okay, so and then so we just put, we have emp ID is equal to sc.next. So we just want to get the next input coming from the user. And now here is the most complex part of the code. We want to search all of those data on the actual record that we are looking. So for that, we will be creating another function, a function that will return the row ID or the row count, row number of the corresponding data that we are searching. So that would be our basis for all of the transaction that we'll be using for generate a payroll, changing the rate, and changing the profile of that person. So just static, just create a static int in search. So we have static int search, and then we will be having a for loop idx in row ID, or let's say idx is equal to 0, idx is less than employee less than the name of the employee dot length. Okay, so the employee length, and then the corresponding incrementation for idx. So if you look at the actual content of the array, we'll be looking at this column 0. So no need to reiterate through the column, but rather we'll be just creating it in a way that it will check the first column, column 0 for each row. So how do we do that? If we check, let's say, employee, take note on creating a comparison on a string in Java, we'll be using equals, okay? So IDX, and then corresponding column. The column is 0, and then here is the keyword, that equals. So, and then open parenthesis and close, and then the comparison that we'll be doing. So we just put here the parameter for the MID. Okay? So parameter would be MID, and then if it is equal, therefore, we'll be assigning a value for the ID. So let's say int EID -1 is equal to -1 if it is not existing, and here EID is equal to the IDX, and then you'll just return EID. So with that part, we are now finished looking at what would be the data, or we return the EID of that specific row ID of that specific user or employee. So here, just use the variable that we have created, row ID is equal to the actual function. So call the function search. We have search, and then we put MID. So there, we have already assigned row ID. So let's see if we have an error first. By MID, cannot find symbol MID. I think use this one. Okay, there you go. We have no error. So if to check if we have done correctly, let's see if just print the data. Oh, okay. So let's proceed. Just proceed on the case 1. So on the case 1, we want to generate the payroll. So let's look at what will happen if we generate payroll. So we have the row ID. So the functionality that we want to do here is to get how many hours did the person work. So int, so system.out.print ln hours work. So how many hours did he work? Okay, then HW is equal to SC dot next int. Want to get the integer input, and then since we already have HW for the next int, so we declare the variable of the rate. Int the rate of that person, rate is equal to employee. Take note, employee, and we already have the row ID. If it is correct, let's check. And then what column is our row ID? So if what column is our rate? So 0, 1, and 2. So we have fixed rate here. So column 2. There. So we want to convert this into a integer. So we convert this one to integer, and then we can now multiply the rate salary. So let's double salary is equal to hours work multiplied by the rate. Okay, let's look at the code. Let's print the data. System.out.print lm. Then salary is equal to the rate or the salary being computed. Okay, so let's see. Error. Okay, so 1 to generate employee ID. What is your employee ID? 234, 258, or 382? So let's select 258, and then how many hours work? Let's say 8, and then it's already 1-2. So basically our computation is correct. But if we redo the computation, 1 generate, and then 258, let's say we use 234, and then we put hours work is 9. Now the rate or the salary of the person is 900. Now that is wrong, because what we want to do is we get the salary of that person or overtime pay based on the percentage that we'll be declaring. Okay, so right now we have said that we want to make it 10% of the rate of the person. Okay, so therefore we need to check it first. So if hours work is greater than regular hours work, which is declared as 8, therefore we will be having different computation. Okay, so what would be our computation? So we get in OTP, overtime OTR for the overtime rate, is equal to the rate multiplied by 0.10%. Actually, this is just a matter of demonstration on how do we do the actual coding. If you want to make it 50%, 80%, you can do that. It's up to you. So OT rate is rate times 0.10, and then we will be looking at how many hours have he exceeded to the hours work. Okay, regular hours work. So overtime is equal to regular hours work, okay, or hours work minus regular hours work. Okay, and then so in overtime pay, actually we can just do this one and then manipulate OTP is equal to hours work multiplied by, or OT multiplied by OTP. Then salary is equivalent to regular hours work. We expect that it's already 8. Okay, so from the rate, okay, plus the overtime pay. Okay, so else, if we do that, what we want to do is this one, HW times rate. Else you want to put, okay, actually even if we do not manipulate this one, it's okay, but let's just do it. 0, put it here. So let's see, salary, okay, so use this one, double. So if I generate and then we press 1 and then see, okay, let's 1, employee number is 234. Then we change it by 100. We work, hours work is 9. Look at is already 810. So another is that we want to make our code identify if it is overtime, undertime, or it is absent. Okay, so we declare just a simple variable here, remarks, is equal to overtime. Let's assume that it's already overtime so that we will not be putting the code here. So if here, if HW is less than 8, RHW, or let's say, let's do this one first, equal to 0, therefore remarks is equal to absent. But if it is else if HW is equal to RHW, therefore remarks is equal to regular. Else, we consider it as undertime. Okay, I think we're done. Let's see. So we go here, 1 generate payroll, and then input employee number is 234, 100, our sort is, let's say 5, or let's say yes 5. So we have 500. Okay, we did not print the remarks, just put remarks here. So let's see what will happen. One, 8. Okay, so 1 generate 1, and then you press 2, 3, 4, and then our sort is 9, so it is overtime. So 1, we input 2, 3, 4, so we put the hours work is 4, should be undertime. Okay, so 1 generate 2, 3, 4, and then we put 0, should be absent. Okay, so it's working fine. So now we have already created the code for the salary. Okay, the next complex part is on the editing of the data. So updating the data is equivalent for one for loop. Okay, we just put a for loop. So in IDX is equal to 0. Take note, we will be iterating through all of the column for each row. Okay, so IDX is equal to 0, and then IDX is less than employee. So we have employee dot row ID, the row ID, that person, and then row ID dot length, and then IDX plus plus. Okay, so that is our code for the iteration. So now on the updating, so we just put a simple code for getting the data out that system.out.println to update the current data input data. So we will not be putting the column or the column of that record, but we can do that. Okay, so just sc employee that row ID sub row ID and its corresponding column which is the IDX is equal to the input. Next. Okay, so here it will just update the data. So we'll just call again. This is the importance of creating function. We'll just call the print data again, so that it will look the changes that we have created. So let's see. Okay, so if you look at this one, so if I press number 2, update profile, so if I input employee number, let's say 258, we change 258, input data for the ID, change it to 233, the name would be Arnold, and then the rate would be 200. You look at the first column had been changed, or second column had been changed, 233, and then it is Arnold. Okay, so it updated. So if we'll be generating the payroll, so if I press 233 and then input hours work is 8, now you can see it's already 16. So basically we are changing the content for each column and for each column of the row. But take note, if we exit the program and rerun the program, it will return to the actual data that we had declared on the program. So it's still 258, mark, and 150. Now, another functionality that we want to do is for the changing of the rate. So for the changing of the rate, it's very straightforward and simple. We just want to change the rate, the column number 2 of that selected row. So input new rate, and then the IDX is 2. That's all. So then we call print data again. So if you call print data, it will just print the content of our array, so that we can look at if it is changed or not. So there. So now change the rate 3. Okay, employee number is 234. I want the rate of 234 to be 500 per hour, and you look at that, it's already 500. So if I generate the payroll and then 234, it should follow the 500 rate. So 8, so it's already 4,000. So basically that's how our code runs. So if I press 4, it will exit. Now here's the question. Here is a wrap up of our code that we have developed. So the first thing that we have done is that generated or declared the actual array that we have manipulating, and then we have declared some conventions and what are the rules that we will be doing in our code. So how many is regular hours work? If hours work is 8, and then if it is greater than 8, what are the consideration that we will do? So the overtime pay is 10% of the actual rate of the person. And then after that, we created a print data, a function that only prints the actual content of the array. So first thing, the first loop that we have done here is the row of that array. And the second loop, when it runs the outer loop, it runs the inner loop to to look for the columns that the row have and print its all content. So we put print ln on the end so that it would be printed on the bottom for the next item of the row. And then search, we have the search for the content of the array wherein we send the employee ID that had been inputted and then putted -1 if it is not found. And EID is returned to the function that code that is calling to it. So another option that you can also consider here is to put if row ID is equal to -1, then you can just put system.out.println, then record not found. Okay, so record not found, and then just put break so that it will not continue. So if you run this one, let's see what will happen. Okay, so if I press 1 and then I put an employee ID, record not found, will stop. So that's our code for searching. Then we manipulate the data according to the row ID that we have. So the important thing is that we have the row ID for the updating of the record. So if there's no row ID on it, we have no basis for updating the record and generating its payroll. So we have a simple computation here and then corresponding remarks if it is absent, regular, and under time. Then salary for the person. So there. Then here is for the changing of the data, input data. We have just put an input data for a generic one, but you can do other things rather than doing the for loop by creating a series of statement for printing and changing getting the input of the user. So we observe the print data is done in a way that it is callable. It can be called several times depending on which part of the code it is needed. And this choice is just a loop that we do in order for us to repeatedly do repetition on the choices that we have provided to the user. So that's our simple payroll program for Java having or using a multi-dimensional array. So that's all, and have a nice day and have a happy coding.